So let's go ahead and apply what we know to this new concept of having private methods. Sorry, private, not methods, but variables to here. So let's start with the point. And this is going to create a bunch of errors in your code, but that's okay. We'll go and fix them. The first thing we want to do is make point private.
We make the point private. Oh wait, point.
The point we already have.
Yeah.
Private. And why don't we also give it a second constructor, right? What we're going to do is that we want our constructor, we want the user to be we want our point to be easy to use, right? In return for making it, harder to access our x and y, let's go ahead and make it easier to use. So we can go public point. So we can remember, you can have as many constructors as you want, so long as you have at least, so long as the constructors have a different number of variables. All right. So what we can do is that we can create a point. So what we can do is that we can create a point object, and that can have we can create a point object, and it can have default values. So we can say that, hey, the x is equal to 0, and the y is equal to 0 if you don't give it anything, right? So if you don't give it anything, we're going to give it basically default values of 0. That makes sense? So they can either invoke it to give it a default, they can create a constructor to give it a default value, or they can give it a new thing as is. The next thing we can do is that, of course, we can use x over here, or we can use this dot x, because there's no confusion between, there's no overshadowing of variables. All right. The next thing we can do is that we can,
So if you use this dot x instead of just normal x, what changes?
This dot x instead of x?
Yeah.
In this context, nothing.
Okay.
It happens to be, by preference, I think you're supposed to use the x, right? Sorry, by preference, you're supposed to use basically this keyword. But if you don't, it's okay, right? If you don't, it's perfectly fine. It's when you've got something like this over here, where you've got x and y over here, right? Where you're overshadowing the variables and so nothing gets set. That here is where you need to use this dot x.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
And this is referencing the public point?
It's referencing, so it's referencing those, it's referencing this current object. It references this object.
Like the x and y that are in the parentheses right there.
So notice that where the highlights meet up. This and the x and x, y and y. And this dot x refers to this instance variable x and this instance variable y. The one that belongs to this point that I've currently created. Okay? So there's another use for this, which is that you can call other constructors using this. So rather than doing this dot x is equal to 0 and this dot y is equal to 0, you can instead call this guy's constructor by saying 0, 0. Now what does that do? Sorry, what does this do? This does calls. Notice how I've highlighted this, and it highlights that point constructor. It calls the constructor which has that same number of variables that you just same number of parameters that you just passed it. Right, so it called the one with 2 parameters. If I were to pass only 1 parameter into it, it would give me an error because we have no 2-parameter constructor. Right? Here we have a 1-parameter constructor. So here we have a 2-parameter constructor, and we called it. Boom, we're good.
Yeah, that's tricky.
No, this is not tricky.
What you just did there.
So we just made 2.
It's a shortcut, essentially. It's calling the other constructor. It's a shortcut for calling the constructor.
Okay.
It says to do that.
Yeah, now I have errors now. I tried to write that.
Where do you get your errors? If they're in other classes, that's okay.
No, it's in the point class.
Okay. Where are you getting your error?
When I tried to make that second constructor.
The first constructor, you mean? Case sensitivity is very important here. You have to make case sensitivity. You've got to use the capital letters if you're using capital letters, right?
And now I have an error here.
Oh, that's it. So okay. So that's because you have two constructors of the same with the same variables, right? How many do I have over there? I have two. That's because I changed the one over there into that one, right? I changed this, so we don't need this anymore. I changed it to that. Okay. That's why you got an error, because if you have two constructors that have the same number of parameters, right? So what just happened over there is that if you have two constructors with the same number of parameters, you get an error. Why do you get an error? Because Java doesn't know which one you want to use to build your point. That's why, right? How does it know? It knows which one based on the number of parameters it has. All right. And if you think what I just did was bad, it gets worse. It does get worse, but I think I might have to show you later because, as we'll see when we get into inheritance, constructors automatically call other constructors. But it does so in a very predefined way, in such a way that you don't really have to worry about it. So public point, but this one will create we can create a point now that has an x and a y and x and a y. So now we'll want to create a getter and a setter. Now getters and setters, I've done one. They're very easy to write. Public get. I'll write public get x for you. Public int get x. Return x. It's fairly simple. Return this dot x to be explicit about it. So go ahead and write that manually. Then you're going to make your IDE write it for you for this next one. Okay? If you are using IntelliJ or NetBeans, what you want to do is hit Alt, and then you may have to then find the insert key if you've got it. If you don't have the insert key, then you'll have to select code from the drop-down menu and hit Generate. But Alt Insert will bring up the Generate menu. Now, getters and setters are so simple that your IDE can automatically write the code for you. So go ahead and select getter.
I don't
Yes, you do. And I said if you don't, you can select code from the drop-down menu. And you do have the insert key. It's right there. So it's the delete key, though, so you'll want to do no. So because it's part of the insert, no. Yeah, function. You got it, function D. There you go.
Getter.
Yep.
YN.
Insert.
Yep.
So insert.
The insert key. Do you have an insert key?
Got it.
Yeah, Alt insert. Select Y. And it will automatically generate it for you. Yep. So for you, you're in Eclipse, right? I said Eclipse that I don't know what. So let's look at Eclipse. It's under Source, Generate Getters and Setters. And then you can select them both, even though you already have that. And just hit OK. And that generated both getters and setters. You just need the getters. That's what we need that. So boom, see it automatically right for you. Right? No problems there. All right. So that's how we can generate the point method. It's got getters and setters now, so we can interact with it again. So now let's go to rectangle. It's got a point. So let's and we'll leave rectangle as is. So now let's go back to our drawing class where we're going to have a whole slew of errors, right? All these errors. All right, so we should have an error here on this line where you go graphics.drawLine and graphics.drawRectangle. Now, typically, here, what we really, here, right, this is understandable because now these are private. So instead of doing p1.x, we'll do p1.getx, p1.getY, p2.getx, and p2.getY. Okay, it makes sense to everybody? Now over here on this line, g.draw rectangle, we had the rectangle. We asked it to get its top left coordinate, but its top left is a point, right? Its top left x, but the x, remember, is private, right? It belongs to rectangle, but if we're inside a rectangle, the rectangle has a point, but the points x and y, they're private. So to get them, we have to use top left dot get x and top left dot get y. Everybody see why we have to use so we're getting the point object inside that lives inside of the rectangle and getting its x and y coordinate. So it wasn't too much to refactor in order to get this to work. Now, yes?
Can you automatically refactor that? Is that possible?
Probably. Probably. But so now let's go ahead and make this a bit easier. Like I said, I really would like it if the rectangle knew how to draw itself. So let's go ahead and write that. Okay, so how do we draw stuff? Well, we draw stuff by painting it on a graphics object. So all we need is access to the graphics object to draw it. So what we're going to do is that we are going to create a method that allows us to draw a rectangle so we can draw a rectangle. So long as we are given a graphics canvas to go with, we can draw it. So let's create it. Public void draw. Right? This is a shape. I want to be able to draw it. And all it needs is a graphics object in order to draw it. So graphics G. Now you'll probably have to import the graphics G up there. Worst case scenario, just import java.auth.star, and I'll import everything from the Abstract Windows toolkit. Right? So here, what can we do? Now that we have it, we can actually say given. Now you might be going, but right, okay, so you've got a draw method in your rectangle, but now how do we draw the rectangle? Right? How do we draw this rectangle when you don't provide me with a height and a length and a top left corner? But the answer is I do provide you with a height, a length, and top left corner because it's inside of, this is an instance variable, which means that a particular rectangle has to call this method, right? This is an action a rectangle can perform, and if a rectangle exists, then it has a length, height, and top left corner. We said so. Although we'll get an error here that when we come back to it, as I mentioned, I haven't forgotten about that. So now let's go ahead and draw. To draw a rectangle, all we have to do is do a g dot draw rectangle, and then provide it with this.
Where does the public void draw need to go?
It should go above the other methods, with the other methods inside of the rectangle class, right? Because this is an action the rectangle is performing. So g.draw rectangle. And then, well, okay, we need the x and y coordinate, but the rectangle doesn't have an x and y coordinate, but it does have a point, right? So this object's top left point dot get x, this object's top left point dot get the y coordinate, and then it needs a length. So this dot length and this dot height. Make sense? So all those things. So now we're using this, the rectangle can draw itself. Right? So I can create multiple rectangles and they can all draw themselves. Okay? So let's actually go ahead and do that.
Wait, you need to write that down. You need to write that down.
It's void draw graphics g.draw rect, this top left x, this top left get y, this dot length, this dot height. Again, this will go on the web if you can't keep up with it. So video. All right. Well, I need to move on to the next example. So so now what we can do with this rectangle is that we can take away all this paint. So let's remove this stuff from paint. Let's go ahead and create a. So let's delete these. So rectangle R is equal to new. So let's go ahead and draw this first rectangle. So let's go ahead and just create a rectangle with initial length of 100 and a width and a height of 200. And then we'll do r.draw, and we just have to pass it the graphics object to draw it, and we run it. And it draws a bit and then gives me a null pointer exception, which I knew an hour ago that it would do this. So now why did it do that? So let's look at the errors. Okay, these are event dispatch errors, which are a bunch of complicated stuff. Let's go until we find something. Drawing line 26, and it occurred in Java line 26. So it occurred over here. Says that there was a null pointer exception. So it has a length and a height, but when we gave it a constructor, what happened? When we called this initial constructor, what was the issue? Did we define a point? Because the constructor we used was the two variable constructor, right? We didn't set up a point though here. So the top left point was left as null. So we tried to find its x, but it's a variable, and its y variable, but it doesn't exist. So that was the issue. All right, so let me see where you are. It says that you have.
Oh wait, right. I put the comma.
And yeah, you're missing a comma there. Okay, so. All right, so we've got this. So how do we fix this? Well, we got to give it a default point. So we'll just say that that the top left is equal to a new point, and we'll give it a default coordinate, 0, 0. And now if we run drawing again, it's going to create the rectangle. But we can do even better now that we have this code up here. Since now every rectangle knows how to draw itself, we can create a whole lot of rectangles. All right? So we can create, in fact, an entire array of rectangles. So let's start by creating an array of, and drawing, let's say 10 rectangles. Okay? Yes.
I'm missing something.
What are you missing?
The constructor for the top left.
Yep.
All right. Did you make a new thing?
We had two. We had one, and then we made another once we added a point.
Okay, and then just added a line.
Top left is equal to new point x and y. So because if we don't give it a coordinate, we always want it to work. Right? If you give me a length and a height, but not a location for it, I'm going to assume where it lives is the top left corner. That's a reasonable expectation, right?
Yeah.
So now let's go back to drawing, and we're going to create a whole bunch of rectangles. So you can create an array of anything. So I can create an array of rectangles. Rectangle brackets. Let's call it rex. Let's shorten that to rex, R-E-X. So a bunch of rectangles. Rex is equal to a new rectangle array. And we said we wanted 10 of them, right? Now, to be clear, what is currently in here is a whole lot of nulls, a whole lot of nothing, right? I'll go ahead and print it out. System.println arrays.toString. You'd have to remember arrays.toString. You have to import this if you want to use it. If I print this, it will be a whole lot of nulls. See, I got 10 nulls, right? So I've got a bunch of places for rectangles to go, but I have to make them now. So we've got to do a for loop. For int I is equal to 0. I is less than arrays. Let's go with rex.length because we'll maybe want to change this later. I++, right? And so now what we'll do is that we'll create. So now what we have to do is that for each of these, for each slot, we are going to put in a new rectangle. Okay. So let's say a new rectangle. Now each new rectangle, it requires a height, a length, a height, and a coordinate. So let's say we want the height to be, we want them all to be the same height, maybe 10 pixels. So that's the second coordinate. The first coordinate is length. Let's say we want it to be 10 times I plus 1, because if we don't do I plus 1, we won't have a height. So the first rectangle, the rectangle at index 0 will be 1, it will be 10 long. At index 1, it will be 20. At index 2, it will be 30, and so on and so forth. Right? And now the next rectangle will be, and now the next one, we're going to go at, we need to give it a coordinate to live at. So we'll give it the coordinate of, let's go with new point, right? Because we can create a new point object just like this. Let's say we all want them to be on the 0 coordinate, actually 10. We want them to be 10 pixels off the screen. And then we'll go and, let's see, let's go ahead. If we draw them all at the same place, it kind of gets boring, right? Because they all overlap. So we'll go and put them maybe at index I times 20. So the first one will be at 0, top left corner will be at 0, then it'll be at 20, sorry, then it will be at 4, so it'll be at 20, 40, and so on and so forth. And now, once we create it, once we've created it, that rectangle, we can now ask it to draw itself. And now we can run it. Ooh, okay, that was weird. There we go.
Could you go to where we made the draw method?
Again, the draw method in rectangle. So let me go and just give me 1 second. Editor tabs. Split vertically. So the rectangle draw method is over here. G.drawRectangle.
Draw rectangle.
Rect.
Top left, G get X.
Yep.
This top left get Y. This dot length. This dot height.
Yep.
I need to see the,
And you need to pass it in a, and you need to pass it a graphics object in order to do.
I need to see the Instagram.
It's right here on the left. Oh, sorry, on the right. Or actually, let me see. Yeah. So I should split it horizontally. That would have made it much better. So here, we've got our rectangle, right? And so now we run this, and there we go. We've got 0. We've got a bunch of rectangles. And now actually, if we go over back to our draw method and change it from draw rectangle to fill, from draw to fill, and now run the program again. we can start drawing things like that.
Wait, I need
You did that in the draw method.
Yep.
I need to do the color.
I just simply changed draw to fill.
I know I just done a rectangle, but I need to still need to do the draw rectangle.
This one over here, and where I did 10 of them.
Yeah.
So I created an array. You don't need the array to string. For I is equal to 0, I is less than rex.length.
What did you change to fill?
I changed in, so active window, split horizontally. I changed it to, what I changed to fill was the draw rect to fill rect.
G dot fill rect.
Mm-hmm. So so now we know how to basically draw rectangles on their own, right? We can create rectangles pretty much anywhere we need, right? So now what else can we do with these? Well, I can start drawing patterns with these kind of things, which is pretty cool. But I mean, I can also, this is actually pretty scalable. I can do, let's say, let's go with 30 of these, right, and run it. And it runs just perfectly fine. In fact, if I open up the window, that works fine. And I can, so you've got the initial length, you've got the initial height, and then you've got the new point. And then you draw it. What? Did you make the points at a very, well, you're drawing them all at the same place then. Let me see. You've got, it's because you got the point, you got it mixed up. No, you're fine. 10 times I, any point, rectangle. Right, and again, you have this, and also 10 items 20. And you still have this one as well. So go ahead and run again. So you're only drawing one big one. Point 10 I times 20. Initial height is 10. Let's see. Rectangle. I'm not sure why. I got an error, but I can't spot it. So I'm not sure what's going on. All right, so we've got an object that we can tell, and we can tell it what to do with itself, and that's pretty cool. And the nice thing about this is that you can't go in and accidentally change a point later. The encapsulation is there to protect you as much as it is there to protect the stuff you write, right? So I can't go in here and accidentally change stuff. But what's cool is that this is inside of an array. This is an object inside of an array, and I can call a method just like this. I don't have to get it outside of the array first. I can just get it. I can directly call it like that, which is really nice. So, and also these are when I did this, these were 30 different rectangles. They have 30 different x and y coordinates So they each have 30 different points, and then there's each of them have their own copy of a length and their own copy of a height. You know? So let's see, what other kind of things can we draw? Anyone? Other basic shapes.
Triangles?
Triangles are good. Let's see, but let's see if G has an easy way to draw triangles. I'm not sure. This is a way to draw polygons. Arcs, I don't really like it. It has ovals though. So why don't we work on, what I like to do now is work on we're going to finally elucidate what that word static means, okay? By drawing a circle. Now this is my personal favorite example here, okay? Because it also introduces us into the debugger a bit. So let's go ahead and create a new new class. And it has to be, again, inside of this object class. Because we're going to learn how to draw this as well. So it's going to be a circle. It's going to be inside of it's going to be wherever you have your drawing project, right? So don't create a new project. So circle, right? So let's think about what circles have. So it's easiest to think of a circle as basically having, as being circumscribed inside of a square. Like if you've got a circle, then the easiest way to draw it is not to figure out, well, it's pretty easy. We can have, so there's two places we can it needs a point to exist. So we can either select the point to be one of two things, okay? We can select the point to be the center of the circle, okay? Or we can select the circle to be I'm terrible at drawing. Or we can select the point to be this top left corner over here, which is actually what Java does, so that's what we're going to do. So it's going to be the top left corner of the circle, this top left corner of the square that the circle exists in. So this will have a point location, right? And that's going to be private as well. Now, what else do these have? Circles essentially have one thing. They don't have the side length. They have everything that they have, their circumference, and their area. It's all tied to their radius, right? So double, and we're going to deal with an integer radius over here, okay? Even though they're typically doubles, okay? And there's also one more thing that these circles tend to have. Or you can do a double radius, it doesn't really matter. But these circles tend to have one more thing that we typically need. Not something that they have, but something that's very useful for us to work with circles, and that's pi, right? So let's create a variable called pi. Now, pi is such a useful thing that I would like everybody to be able to see it. Okay, public pi, that's a double, is equal to 3.14159. Okay, and that's close enough for me. Okay, the issue though is if we leave it like this, right? I can go into drawing over here. You don't need to type this down, but I could go into here, type circle C is equal to a new circle, right? I can create a new circle, and then I could go pi is equal to 3, and that would mess up all sorts of math, right? So obviously I don't want that. I don't want them to be able to change it. So I can use the keyword final over here. So public final double pi. Okay? So that means that each circle has a radius, a location, and a copy of pi, which is 3.14159, and you can't change it. That's what final means. So public circle, right? So its location, so it's either gonna, so again, we're gonna use, we got to use a constructor here. It's gonna have one of two constructors. The first constructor, if you don't provide anything, I'll say it has a radius of 10, and it's located at a point called, we're gonna locate it at 0, 0. Sounds fair? Otherwise, you can, if you provide a, if you provide me with a radius, if you give me a radius and a location, so not int loc, point location, I'll set it up to be that int and location. So I'll say this dot radius is equal to radius, and I'll say that this dot loc is equal to location, right? And if you just give me the radius, public circle, which is what most, yeah, and I'll give it the point there. Okay. So the next thing and again, this is a great example, right? So we'll go ahead and write some just standard methods for it, such as what is the circle, what is the, let's go ahead and write how to calculate the circumference, right? Public double get circumference. Is equal to okay, it says I misspelled circumference. I don't know how to spell it, so public get circumference. And that will return what? It's 2 pi r for the circumference. So 2 times pi times the radius. And public double get area is equal to return 2, and that's pi r squared, so pi times radius times radius. Again, these are just simple, these are the kind of methods you would write on an exam. Now, how do we draw it? Well, we'll have a public double, so sorry, public void draw, just as we did for the rectangle, and we need to pass in a graphics object, which you'll probably have to import. Right, it says I have to import it, so we'll go ahead and import it. Okay, and now to draw it, I can use g.fill oval, and it needs an x and y coordinate, and a width and a height. So, and what it says is that it's the width of the oval and the height of the oval, which would be the diameter of the circle, and they'd both be the same. So for that, we can just do point. We can do loc.getX coordinate for the x coordinate, loc.getY for the y coordinate, right? And then for the height and width, there's going to be the same thing, which is going to be 2 times the radius, right? And 2 times the radius, because what it wants is the diameter. For the height and width of an oval, it wants the diameter, but a circle has the same height and width, and the total height and width of something is the radius. I mean, everybody got this now?
I'm getting a cannot resolve, what is that? Yeah, cannot resolve symbol graphics.
You got to import it. Import java.awt.graphics or star. So let's go back to drawing. Everybody okay with me going back to drawing now? Not yet. Really, the important thing is the draw method right over here. G.fill oval, location x, location y, 2 times the radius, 2 times the radius. So we need to test this out to make sure it works before we go and have fun with circles. Got it? Okay. So now let's go ahead and create a circle object over here. Circle C is equal to a new circle. And let's go ahead and it needs a radius, so we're going to give it a radius of 10, and it needs a coordinate. So wherever we want to put it is, right, let's go ahead and say we want it to be at, let's put it at 100, 100. New point 100, 100. Okay, and there we're just creating a new point, and it's going to be passed in as a, and so what this creates is so remember, what does this do? This creates a this creates a new point, and resolves to, and it evaluates to a memory location, and then it copies the memory location into the argument in the constructor. So that's why we're able to get away without having to create a variable for it. And then we can go c.draw g. Then if we run this, we've got a circle over here now. So that's pretty cool. Now this is actually less about drawing circles and more about drawing a lot of circles. Okay? So again, I'm going to do a circle array circles is equal to new circles, new circle 1,000 of these suckers. And I'm going to go up over here and change, it has up to here for the canvas. I'm going to set this to, instead of being a 400 by 400 window, I'm going to set this to be, let's say 1,000 by 1,000. Let's go ahead and run this just to see what happens to the window. Right, it gets pretty big. Let's go with 720 over here. Or just maybe 600 over here. That's better. Okay. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go for int I is equal to 0, I is less than circles dot length I plus plus. So each circle has its own point and its own, it's got, so let's see. Each circle has its own x coordinate and y coordinate, which is encoded in the point, and then its own radius. And that's what we need created. So circles, yes.
I'm thinking in error that I'm missing a point.
Is it in the same?
It's in circle C equals new circle radius 10, new point. And then I put in 100, 100.
Did you do the? Are you inside the same project as you were with the other?
Yeah, it's on the same source folder.
Okay. Not sure why. I think it thinks that you're using a different kind of circle for some reason. I'm not sure why.
Is it at the top?
No, it says it's a circle. It's thinking. That's it.
Well, we have an input for a circle. Is that what's causing it?
Yes, that is what's causing it. Because otherwise, it thinks it's that kind of circle rather than the circle you wrote. Okay. So now I've got 1,000 circles. So let's go ahead and build them up. Actually, make them new circle. Let's give them all a radius of 10. Let's give them all. Actually, make them small. Radius of 5, and then we're going to put them at a point. Let's see. Actually. I is equal to, and then we'll put it in a new point. And let's get their locations. We're going to make this array a bit better because we're going to have to make this 2D two-dimensional in a bit. Yeah, let's not make 1,000. We'll go ahead and just do 10 for right now. Then we'll make it a 2D array of circles. New point I. Put it at location I times 20 and I times 10. And now if we run this, oh right, what do we have to do? We have to actually draw the circles. Circles I dot draw G. And now we've got some circles being drawn over here. Let's go ahead and make them blue. So to make everything blue, we go G dot set color to color dot blue. Right now we can get this hanging in a modern art museum for like a couple $100, right? So take that, modern art, right? And so anyway, the now let's go ahead and make this a 2D array. So let's make it 10 by 10 to start with. So and now now we're gonna have to modify this loop quite a bit. So what are we going to do? So circle.length. So we've got a 2D array of circles. Now why is this? Because I'm going to be using an x. I'm going to be changing what the x and y coordinate are. So for int j is equal to 0, j is less than circles.length, or specifically circles 0.length, or circles i.length. J++, be sure not to do I++ there or you're going to be in for a world of hurt. Okay, and then what are we going to do? Circles I, J is equal to new circle 10 new point. And then here we can say, well, let's say I and j. Doesn't really matter which goes to which at this point. So let's go ahead and do I times 10, j times 20. And now it's going to start varying. Oh, but we have to remember to draw it, right? Circles I, j, right? We store the circle in there, and then we tell it to draw itself. So we're starting to get rows of circles. We obviously need to spread them out a bit more, especially in this direction. 20 by 20. And we can afford to have some more columns, I think. 20 by, let's go ahead and bump it up to 40 by 40. And run it. And now we've got lots of circles all over this place. How many circles do we have? We've got 40 rows and 40 columns. What?
80?
40 rows and 40 columns. Does this look like 80?
No.
More than 80. It's 40 rows, 40 columns. How many?
160.
100 so not 160. More than that. It's 40 times 40. So it's 1,600. 1,600 circles. Each of which have their own point class. So each circle, what does that have? It has its own point class, its own location, and its own copy of pi. Right? This is a local variable. Public final double pi. 3.14159. So if we actually, let's see, I think I could get a breakpoint here. So if I go over to here at the, right, and I create a breakpoint here, and instead I run to the debug view, allow access, okay, and now it says I'm connected to the VM, and now what can I do with this? I can look at the let's see. So I should be able to look at the variables now that I'm in the debug view. So let's go ahead and see. Or actually, no, I put the breakpoint at the wrong spot. So I think. So stop. Let's go ahead and put the debug point over to here. I'm just going to put this out. Bang over here. So it should run. And here's all the, and now here we've got our variables, right? So it's going to be a bit hard to see, but if you watch it on your computer, it should be fine. So if we look at circles, right? It's a 40 by 40 array. So there's 40 rows here. I'll open one up and I'll go over to here. And this circle here at index 5, index 0 has its own copy. It has its own radius, its own point, and its own copy of pi. And this circle also has its own copy of pi. And this circle has its own copy of pi. And this circle has its own copy of pi. So that's kind of a bit of a problem, actually, because we really only ever need one copy of pi, right? We only need one copy of pi. If I were to create 1,000,000 circles, then I'd have, sorry, 1,000,001 circles, I'd have 1,000,000 more copies of pi than I needed, right? And now how much wasted memory would that be with 1,000,000 circles? So how many bytes is a double? Anybody remember? 64 bits. So that's 8 bytes. So that's 8 megabytes of just wasted space, which is a lot in an embedded system. Not much these days. But if you scale it up to billions, then that's gigabytes wasted. So we only need one copy of pi. So let's give it only one copy of pi by adding the word static. And that's what static really does here. Static means, so we've got 3 types of variables. We have the local variables, which are what's passed into a method or created inside of a method, or created inside of a loop, right? Then you have 2 other types of variables. You have the instance methods, which belong to, so you have 2 other types of variables. The instance variables, which belong to a class, so to an instance of an object, a specific thing you build, right? Each circle has its own radius and its own point, right? So what's the other type of variable? Well, it's what we call a class variable. It doesn't belong to any particular instance of a class. It belongs to everybody in the class. Okay? It doesn't belong to anybody, or it belongs to everybody. Choose your metaphor, okay? But what it is that it's one copy that's shared among every single member. So that's what static means. It means it doesn't belong to any particular circle, right? It's something that all circles have one single copy that's shared among them. As a result, by the way, you can type circle. So we can do system.out.println circle. So that's the class, right? Dot pi, because it's something that belongs to the class as opposed to the object. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's the difference. The class is like the blueprint, right? The pi is what belongs to the blueprint. And so that's what you use the word static for. And same with static method. You don't need to have an object to run a static method. And instance variables need an instance. So I think it's okay to stop this now. And so I think the remaining 50 minutes you can have to work on the homework.